One day, a name you know stops showing up. No interviews, no posts, no new projects announced. Just gone. And almost exactly a year later, they resurface, and everything they touch turns to gold. This isn't a coincidence, it's a pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Visual: a spotlight fading to black, a calendar with a year blacked out. Here's the pattern. Bill Gates disappears twice a year, on purpose. He calls it Think Week. No staff, no family, a cabin, stacks of papers, and silence. Some of Microsoft's most important strategic pivots came out of those weeks, including the memo that redirected the entire company toward the internet in 1995. Daniel Day-Lewis does something similar. Between films, he vanishes for years at a time. No public appearances. Some reports say he trained as a cobbler in Italy, just to disappear into something that had nothing to do with acting. Adele locked herself away for months before every album. No socials, no sightings, just her and the songs nobody heard yet. These aren't eccentric habits. They're the same mechanism, wearing different clothes, and there's a reason it works. One that has almost nothing to do with willpower. Your brain has something called an identity budget. Every day, you spend part of it just being seen. The way you talk in meetings, the version of your opinions that won't cause friction, the face you make when someone asks how you're doing. None of that is dishonest exactly. It's just maintenance. And maintenance has a cost. Psychologists have a term for what happens when that cost never lets up. Identity foreclosure. When you become so busy performing a version of yourself that you stop having the bandwidth to develop into anything else. Growth requires slack, and public life, by design, leaves you none. So the people who make the biggest leaps do something that looks irrational from the outside. They remove the audience entirely, not to relax, not to hide, to stop paying the tax on being watched, so every ounce of that identity budget can go somewhere else. But here's the part that should unsettle you a little. Not everyone who disappears comes back. For every well-documented Think Week success story, there are far more people who vanished from public momentum and simply stayed gone. The difference isn't the disappearing, it's what happens inside it. Researchers studying creative and professional breakthroughs found something surprising about periods of isolation. The ones that produced growth had structure. The ones that produced stagnation didn't. Gates doesn't disappear to find himself. He disappears with a stack of specific problems and a deadline. Adele doesn't vanish to relax. She vanishes with unfinished songs she's committed to finishing. The people who come back different treat the disappearance like a locked room with one task inside it. The people who come back the same, or don't come back at all, treat it like an escape. Same silence, same absence from the feed, completely different outcome. And there's a specific window of time this seems to take. Not a weekend, not a lifetime. Almost always, somewhere close to a year. Here's why a year, specifically, and the earliest recorded case of this might surprise you. The plague closes Cambridge University. A 23-year-old student named Isaac Newton has nowhere to be. So he goes home to a farm in the middle of nowhere for about 18 months. No lectures, no colleagues, no audience for a single idea he had. In that stretch of enforced, unwatched isolation, he lays the groundwork for calculus, his early work on the nature of light, and the beginning of the theory of gravity. He later called it the most productive period of his entire life. He didn't plan the disappearance. The plague forced it on him. But the mechanism was identical to Gates in his cabin 350 years later, a closed room, real problems, and zero audience for the parts where the ideas didn't work yet. Skill researchers studying deep expertise since have found the same threshold, over and over. Meaningful leaps, not incremental polish, but an actual jump to a new level of ability, tend to require a minimum sustained stretch of undistracted, unwatched focus. Short of that, you're just refining what you already know how to do. A year is long enough to fail at something completely privately, to be bad at it in a room with no one keeping score. That privacy is the entire mechanism, not the isolation, the absence of an audience judging the middle part. Because here's what almost never gets said out loud. You cannot be watched and be in beta at the same time. The moment there's an audience, there's a performance. And a performance can't afford to fail messily, publicly, for months, the way real transformation requires. So the ones who make the leap don't get braver. They get invisible first. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, if you're honest with yourself. Because you don't need Newton's plague or Gates' money or Adele's fame to run this pattern. You need the willingness to be unseen while you're bad at something. Most people can't tolerate that. Not because they lack discipline, because they've built their entire sense of self around being watched while competent. The idea of visibly fumbling for a year with no one applauding the effort feels like a kind of death. So instead, people improve in public, loudly, immediately, which means they never actually leave the version of themselves that already exists. They optimize the character they're already playing. They never get the closed room. But there's a second half to this pattern that almost nobody talks about, the part where they come back. Because the re-entry is never an accident either. Notice something about every case we've covered. The return has a shape to it. Gates comes back from Think Week with a memo, not a mood. Adele comes back with a finished album, not an update on how she's feeling. Newton didn't emerge from Woolsthorpe with a diary of self-reflection. He emerged with equations. The re-entry isn't, "I'm back. Here's what I learned about myself." It's a closed door opening once, with something finished behind it. That's what makes it land as transformation instead of an excuse. Nobody watched the 18 months of failure. Everybody sees the version that walks back out. If you disappear and come back with nothing but a story about how you found yourself, people forget you were ever gone. If you disappear and come back with the thing you built in the dark, that's the version people can't stop talking about. The silence was never the point. It was the incubator for the thing you'd eventually show. You don't need a cabin in the woods. You don't need a plague to force your hand. You need one thing most people never give themselves: a stretch of time long enough to be bad at something with nobody grading it, and a rule that nothing produced during it gets shown to anyone until it's actually finished. That could be an evening a week with your phone in a drawer. A single unannounced project nobody expects updates on. A version of Think Week sized to your actual life. Even 2 days, completely protected, with one specific problem inside it. The people who disappear and come back sharper aren't braver than you. They just stopped needing an audience for the part where they weren't good yet. And they knew better than to walk back out until they had something finished in their hands. Every leap has an invisible middle. The people who make it are the ones willing to spend time there completely unseen. Not performing, not documenting, not asking anyone to witness the mess. Find the room nobody's allowed into. Stay until you have something finished. That's where the version of you that actually changes gets to exist.